When we talk about grief, many people assume that time alone will heal it, that burying it deep inside will make it fade away, but the truth is quite the opposite. Unacknowledged grief doesn't disappear, it simply changes form. When a loss occurs, whether it's the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, or even the loss of a dream, we are often told to move on, to be strong, to distract ourselves. And while the world expects us to continue with life as if nothing happened, the grief we silence doesn't vanish. It becomes part of us, lingering beneath the surface, influencing how we think, feel, and behave. Think about the moments when sadness suddenly arises out of nowhere, when a memory brings an ache you didn't expect, or when anger erupts in situations that don't seem to warrant such intensity. These are the whispers of buried grief. It speaks through unexpected emotions, subtle reactions, or even through numbness when we feel nothing at all. Grief left unacknowledged is not gone. It is alive within, waiting for recognition. The tragedy is that many of us have been conditioned to fear grief, to believe that allowing ourselves to feel it will break us. We bottle it up, hoping it will dissolve with time, but in reality it only deepens, attaching itself to other experiences and magnifying our pain. A person may not realize it, but their difficulty trusting others, their struggles with self-worth, or their tendency to avoid intimacy may all be rooted in grief they once buried and never allowed themselves to process. Grief is not a weakness. It is a natural human response to loss. When ignored, it becomes like an unhealed wound. It festers silently, creating patterns of behavior and emotional responses that shape the way we engage with the world. We cannot bury grief and expect it to die. What is buried alive does not rest. It grows roots inside of us. The only way forward is through acknowledgement. Grief asks not to be silenced, but to be felt, honored, and expressed. When we finally face the grief we have hidden, we take the first step toward freeing ourselves from its quiet hold. Grief unspoken is not gone. It lives in us until we give it permission to breathe. The body has a way of carrying truths that the mind tries to forget. When grief is buried, when it is never given a voice, it doesn't vanish. It settles into the body. It shows up as tension in the shoulders, tightness in the chest, headaches that never seem to leave, or fatigue that no amount of sleep can cure. People often believe these are just physical ailments, but many times they are the language of grief that has never been acknowledged. The body remembers the stories we are too afraid to tell ourselves. When someone loses a loved one or goes through a painful ending, the mind may try to push forward, convincing itself that life must go on, but the body doesn't forget the ache of what was lost. It holds on to the tears that were never cried, the words that were never spoken, the love that had no place to go. Over time, this unexpressed pain becomes stored in the nervous system, creating stress responses that affect every aspect of life: anxiety, depression, chronic illness. So often these conditions have roots not only in biology, but in unresolved grief living in the body. Trauma research shows us that when emotions are suppressed, they don't dissolve, they imprint themselves in muscle memory, in heart rhythms, even in the way we breathe. Someone who has buried grief may notice that they hold their breath without realizing, or that they cannot fully relax, even in safe spaces. This is the body carrying grief like a heavy secret. It is the body's way of saying, I have not been allowed to heal. Ignoring these signals doesn't make them go away. If anything, the longer we suppress grief, the more the body cries out through symptoms, demanding to be heard. What many people mistake for random illness or unexplained pain is often the residue of unprocessed grief. This is why true healing is not only about thinking differently, but about listening to what the body has been trying to say all along. Grief buried in the mind is remembered by the body, and until we honor it, the body will continue to remind us that something within still needs our care. When grief feels unbearable, the natural instinct for many is to avoid it. We throw ourselves into work, keep busy with endless tasks, seek comfort in addictions, or distract ourselves with noise so that silence never gives grief the chance to surface. For a while, these strategies may seem to work. They give the illusion of control, of moving forward. But the truth is, numbing and distractions don't heal grief. They only push it further down, allowing it to take deeper root in the unconscious. What we refuse to face grows stronger in silence. Distractions may quiet grief temporarily, but they also rob us of authenticity. We begin to live disconnected from our true emotions, creating a split between the person we show the world and the pain we carry inside. This split can lead to feelings of emptiness, of not knowing who we really are, because we're constantly trying to outrun what is demanding to be felt. Grief is patient. It waits beneath the surface and it resurfaces in unexpected moments, through a sudden wave of sadness, through anger that feels out of proportion, or through the inability to fully feel joy even in moments that should bring happiness. Addictions are one of the clearest signs of buried grief, whether it's alcohol, food, work, or even constant scrolling on a phone. These behaviors are not random, they are coping mechanisms. They are ways of saying, I cannot sit with this pain, so I must silence it. But every attempt to silence grief only prolongs its presence. The energy we spend numbing is the very energy that could have been used to heal. True healing begins not with avoidance, but with courage. To sit with grief, to allow ourselves to feel its full weight, may be terrifying, but it is also the only path toward release. Distractions delay grief, but acknowledgement transforms it. By daring to feel, we allow the wound to breathe, and only then does it begin to close. Grief cannot be numbed into silence. It must be felt, honored, and faced for healing to finally begin. Unprocessed grief doesn't just stay within us, it seeps into the way we connect with others. Many conflicts in relationships aren't really about what's happening in the present moment, but about old grief resurfacing. A partner's silence may trigger the memory of past abandonment. A simple disagreement may stir up the ache of past rejection. When grief has not been acknowledged, it colors our perception, making us react not only to the situation in front of us, but also to the unresolved pain that still lives inside. This is why relationships often feel heavier than they should. People wonder why they overreact, why they feel mistrust, or why intimacy feels threatening. The answer lies in grief that was never given space to heal. If someone lost love early in life, whether through death, neglect, or emotional absence, they may carry that loss into every relationship. Instead of seeing their partner clearly, they filter the relationship through the lens of their old grief, expecting to be hurt, abandoned, or disappointed again. This cycle is not intentional, yet it is powerful. Buried grief creates fear. Fear of losing again, fear of opening up, fear of being vulnerable. And so even in loving relationships, walls are built, distance is created, and emotional closeness becomes difficult. It's not that the person doesn't want love, they desperately do, but their grief convinces them that love always leads to pain. The most painful part is that grief doesn't only keep people from receiving love, it also keeps them from fully giving it. When someone is carrying unacknowledged sorrow, they often struggle to trust, to let go, and to be present. The past lies between them and the person in front of them, silently shaping the connection. Healing this dynamic requires recognizing that much of what feels like relationship conflict is actually grief speaking. Once we see this, we can separate the past from the present, allowing relationships to become a place of healing instead of reenactment. When grief is faced and honored, it stops dictating how we love. Married grief will always surface in relationships, but when acknowledged, it can transform them into deeper spaces of connection and truth. Grief does not heal in silence. It heals when it is witnessed. Yet so many people are taught to hide their pain, to keep their sorrow private, as if speaking about it would make them weak or a burden. But grief that remains locked inside continues to weigh on the heart, while grief that is shared begins to soften. What we keep hidden grows heavier, but what we allow to be seen begins to transform. When someone is grieving, they don't necessarily need solutions or advice, they need presence. They need someone to listen without judgment, someone who can hold space for their tears, their anger, their confusion. The simple act of being heard allows grief to breathe, and in that breathing, the pain loses some of its grip. This is why cultures throughout history created rituals, ceremonies, and communal mourning practices. They understood something we often forget today. Grief was never meant to be carried alone. Silence, on the other hand, isolates. When we bury grief and refuse to express it, it doesn't disappear, it builds walls between us and the people around us. Others may sense something is wrong, but never know how to reach us, and we end up feeling even more alone. In this way, silence doesn't protect us, it deepens the wound. Giving grief a voice doesn't mean endlessly reliving the past. It means honoring what was lost, acknowledging its place in our story, and allowing others to see our humanity in its rawest form. Whether spoken to a friend, written in a journal, expressed through art, or cried into the night, grief needs expression. The form doesn't matter as much as the courage to let it out. When grief is witnessed, something shifts. It no longer feels like a secret we must guard, but a truth that can be carried with compassion. In being seen, grief softens into something bearable, and from that space, healing begins. Grief does not ask for silence. It asks to be spoken, shared, and held with tenderness until it no longer feels like a burden we must carry alone. When we finally turn toward grief instead of running from it, something remarkable begins to happen. Grief, once faced with compassion, no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes a teacher, a mirror reflecting the depth of our love, the fragility of life, and the strength of our humanity. Transformation is not about erasing grief, but about integrating it into the story of who we are. The pain of loss does not vanish, but it softens. And instead of holding us hostage, it becomes part of the wisdom we carry. Integration means acknowledging that the person we lost, the dream that ended, or the moment that broke us is forever part of our lives. But it doesn't define every step we take. It means we stop resisting the pain and allow it to coexist with joy, gratitude, and love. Grief no longer blocks us from living fully. It deepens our experience of life. We begin to see beauty more vividly, to cherish connection more profoundly, and to value the present moment in ways we never did before. When grief is unintegrated, it keeps us trapped in cycles of avoidance or despair. But when it is honored and embraced, it opens the door to compassion, not only for ourselves, but for others who suffer. We begin to recognize the shared nature of loss, that everyone carries invisible wounds, and this recognition makes us softer, kinder, more present. In this way, grief can be alchemized into empathy and connection, giving meaning even to the hardest experiences. Healing does not mean forgetting or moving on. It means moving forward with grief as part of us, but no longer controlling us. It becomes a reminder of what we loved and what we survived, and it offers us the strength to live more authentically. Transformation through grief is not about losing the pain, but about reshaping it into something that gives us depth and resilience. When we integrate grief, we do not remain broken. We become whole in a new way, carrying both the loss and the love, both the wound and the wisdom.